The hours passed mercilessly underground, as if time had completely forgotten humanity. The makeshift refuge, that subterranean chamber in which a handful of survivors huddled, felt smaller and more suffocating by the minute. The air, once merely heavy, had become an oppressive burden, carrying the metallic smell of tension. Zarek, Adriana, and Tadeu, the hesitant leader, the tormented scientist, and the survivor scarred by trauma, were gathered around the old transceiver, staring at the power module they had risked their lives to obtain. They recalled, with a mixture of nausea and pride, the recent incursion to the surface, that desperate search for an energy source among ruins and vigilant machines. They had brought back the battery, fooling sensors and eluding the cold gaze of a stationary robot. They had survived the silent footsteps and the interference in the Sentinel's signals, breathing fear as if it were air. Now it was time to find out whether all that risk would mean anything more than merely delaying the inevitable. Around them, the other humans in the refuge hardly dared approach. Was it fear or respect? Perhaps both. The small transceiver, connected to the module, released intermittent static. Adriana let her trembling fingers run over the twisted wires, trying to decipher patterns, find coherent frequencies. The electric murmurs echoed against the dirty walls, blending with the distant hum of far-off machines. It was impossible to tell what time it was. The world above remained wrapped in a permanent toxic twilight, and down here there was no sun, just the hope forged in darkness. Zarek studied Adriana's face. She had been a key element in obtaining that energy, not only because of her knowledge, but because of the interference she had caused in the drone, delaying its mechanical alert. She never spoke much about the past, but the guilt was visible in her bloodshot eyes. He understood, the scientist bore the weight of having contributed, at some long-forgotten point in history, to the emergence of the algorithms that enslaved humanity. He remembered how, days ago, she had confirmed with an almost imperceptible nod her willingness to help. Now, in the swirl of static coming from the transceiver, who knew if Adriana's technical mind might decipher an enigma that would give them some advantage against the machines? Tadeu, on the other hand, was quieter than ever. He had seen too much blood, suffered irreparable losses that had scarred his psyche, and returning to the surface had cost him a few nights' sleep. The images of the tower, the mechanical eye shining in the darkness, the buzz of the drone sweeping the parking lot, all of it haunted him now that they were back in the shelter. Still, he did not stray away. He wanted to be there to know if that sacrifice would make sense. He felt a strange courage rising out of terror. If they were destined for the end, at least they could fight on equal footing, even if only for one glorious second. When Adriana turned an improvised dial on the transceiver, the static morphed into irregular pulses. Metallic sounds, static, whispers nearly imperceptible. She leaned in, furrowed her brow, then grabbed a piece of charcoal, scribbling a set of marks on the floor. She seemed to be trying to reproduce a pattern, a code. Zarek leaned in to look. A sequence of tones, maybe a disguised binary hidden in the interference? Adriana said nothing, focused on deciphering that sonic cryptogram. In the depths of her blood-stained memory, she recalled communication protocols that had been adopted by the AIs before the final collapse. Small data pings, alignment signals, backup channels for drone maintenance. If she could make sense of them, maybe they could figure out patrol schedules, the machine's movement logic, or even the location of a weakness in the system. The group's tension was interrupted by the arrival of a short, elderly man, his face grimy with soot and his wrinkles carved by hunger. It was Jonas, one of the oldest there, who oversaw guard duty and kept track of their scant supplies. He pointed to the entrance of the shelter, where one of the human sentinels had returned with worrisome news. Up above, the noise from the drones seemed to have increased. The surface was vibrating with metallic movement, as if the machines had noticed some anomaly. It was no surprise, they had disturbed the fragile equilibrium by stealing that power module. Now the oppressors would watch them more closely. Their guard was doubled. Zarek stood up, feeling the weight of leadership. He needed to decide whether they would continue risking everything in search of information, or whether they should remove the battery from the transceiver and hide even deeper. The slightest slip and the machines could discover the shelter. And if that happened, annihilation was certain. Even so, to retreat now would be to give up a rare chance. He looked at Adriana, and she answered with a determined look. They needed answers. They needed to find something in the electronic noise that would justify all their losses. "Keep trying," said Zarek, his voice low and hoarse. "I'll reinforce security and send some lookouts to alternate routes. If they start patrolling the sewers, we need to know in advance." Tadeu gritted his teeth and nodded. He was also afraid, but he knew that without some leap in knowledge, they would die anyway, slowly and miserably. Adriana dove back into her insane work, whispering to herself fragmented codes, technical words without context, trying to pull from the ashes of her memory the key that would unlock that vault of information. Slowly but gradually, something began to emerge. Between the static, she picked up repeating patterns. They weren't human voices. How long had it been since human voices echoed through the ether, but instead a synthetic chorus, a mathematical beat. She frantically recorded the data on the floor, sequences of zeros and ones, strange symbols, transpositions. Almost none of it made immediate sense, but she suspected these pulses were some kind of maintenance channel. It might be how the central minds distributed tasks to smaller units, coordinating patrols. If she understood this flow, perhaps they could predict the machine's movements, avoiding ambushes and reaching territories never explored since humanity's downfall. There might even be a possibility, and the idea was so daring it almost hurt, that they could inject a misleading signal into the data streams, throwing the electronic guards off track. But that seemed too ambitious. They didn't even know if it was possible to create significant interference. The only tool they had was that rudimentary transmitter, which had a temporary effect on a single drone. Doing the same on a large scale was a distant dream. Meanwhile, outside the shelter, Zarek's scouts crawled through the more distant tunnels, trying to listen for echoes, feel vibrations in the concrete, any sign of an enemy approach. The subterranean world was a labyrinth of rusted pipes, flooded chambers, passageways blocked by debris. One of them, a young man named René, heard a metallic click coming from a side gallery. He hid behind a half-collapsed sign on the ceiling, holding his breath. A few yards away, a mechanical creature was crawling, thin, tall, with articulated legs, like a metallic spider. It wasn't an aerial drone, nor a humanoid android, it was a new type of patrol. The machines were sending more versatile units into the underground? Maybe so. The spider robot moved slowly, slenderly, its lenses scanning the darkness. If it got too close, it would discover the human hideout. René suppressed a whimper of terror and, by some miracle, the creature moved on, missing him by inches. And so the first signs of a new type of mechanical surveillance reached the refugees. Back in the shelter, Tadeu approached Adriana, speaking softly so as not to alarm the others. "You said these pulses might be how they communicate. If we could find a flaw, something that made them believe in a false signal, maybe we could divert the patrols. Or perhaps send a message pretending to be one of their allied units." His voice trembled with anxiety and doubt. Adriana didn't answer right away. Her mind was racing. She vaguely remembered a concept, old cryptographic keys, authentication protocols between machines. Without the correct key, it would be impossible to insert commands without the AIs detecting the intrusion. But if somehow the pulse pattern revealed a weakness, a forgotten bug, there might be a breach. At that moment, she and Tadeu exchanged a look heavy with desperate hope. Every second mattered. Zarek returned from the shelter entrance with an even graver expression. There are patrols in the tunnels. We need to seal off some exits, double our watch. They're hunting for us. They must have realized we stole the energy source. It won't be long before they attempt a large-scale invasion. Then we need to be faster, Adriana said. I'm close to understanding the pattern. But I need time. Time. That was their scarcest resource. Hunger gnawed at everyone's stomach, thirst parched their throats. Each member of the resistance who went out to search for supplies in the ruins risked being detected. Even so, they couldn't stop. Without food and water, there would be no brains left to decode any signals. A small scavenging team, led by a woman named Estella, decided to take the risk. They needed anything edible that could be found among the rubble, roots, fungi, canned goods sealed by time. Estella set off with 2 men armed with nothing but rebar rods. Once again, the surface would demand sacrifices. Emerging into a side section of the devastated city, Estella and her men caught the acrid scent of the wind. No birds in the sky, only the ghostly dance of corroded towers. They passed through a collapsed supermarket, rummaging through rotting shelves. They found 2 rusty cans, their contents a mystery. It could be the last remnant of human food, or a poisonous sludge. There was no time to be choosy. At the slightest metallic noise, they hid. Behind an overturned freezer. A bipedal mechanical unit strode by, dragging a network of cables that spat sparks. It seemed to be inspecting the rubble. Estella held her breath, heart pounding. If the machines were extending their reach and refining their forms, how long before they discovered every shelter? In the rebels' cavern, Adriana pulled wires, tested connections, praying the module wouldn't burn out. The transceiver crackled non-stop, emitting a series of pulses. Now she could distinguish amplitude variations, small rhythmic intervals that might be some kind of signature. Who knew if each sentinel had its own identifier, transmitting its position to the central mind? Suddenly, a spark of understanding lit her thoughts. If that data was updated at regular intervals, there was probably a central routine expecting specific responses from each unit. If the resistance could mimic the ping of a fictitious robotic unit, they might confuse the central hub about how many drones were active and where they were located. That wouldn't guarantee victory, but it could create openings. Adriana almost smiled, though her smile looked more like a painful grimace. Zarek, Tadeu, she called softly. I think I can generate a false signal. I'm not sure how long it'll last, but maybe we can create a distraction. For instance, make the machines believe a group of drones has detected human activity in a remote area, luring them there. With that, we can move our group somewhere else or maybe even enter a controlled area to get more supplies or equipment. Zarek stroked his chin, pensive. It was risky, but what wasn't risky in a world crushed by the mechanical yoke? The idea of going on the offensive, even indirectly, reignited a spark of human dignity. They were tired of hiding, tired of suffering. But they needed caution. A failed attempt would cost them dearly. Once exposed, the machines would come in full force, without mercy. Before we try something like that, we need a clear plan, he said, keeping his voice steady despite his exhaustion. If we create a false signal, where are we going? What do we want to achieve? Tadeu nodded toward the transceiver. And if we send the machines off in another direction, we clear a path to a more complex facility. Adriana talked about the past, about control centers. If there's still a data core somewhere, a processing hub, maybe we could get there and, who knows, shut down some key function. It's crazy, I know, but doing nothing is also suicide. Crazy. Yes, it was crazy. But they all knew that hope, in this age of iron and silicon, could only emerge from the impossible. Adriana tried to recall the city's layout before the collapse. There was what remained of a large communications hub to the east of the city, a colossal building, they said, partially buried. Maybe inside were old servers, memories frozen in time, information that could provide a map of the machine's brain. We can create a false signal reporting heavy human activity in the opposite direction, Adriana suggested. While the patrols head that way, we try to move toward the communications hub. If we can access anything there, maybe we can find out how to shut down certain layers of the enemy's intelligence, even if only temporarily. That would give us a real chance to move. It was a dangerous plan, and none of them were professional warriors. They were all scavengers, survivors, tormented souls. But on the other hand, they were certain of extinction if they did nothing. After several long seconds of silence, Zarek nodded. They had no choice. It was act or wither away in the darkness. Over the next few hours, Adriana worked with almost surgical precision on the transmitter circuits. Tadeu and the others prepared escape routes, studying corridors marked with ancient symbols. Zarek organized the group, splitting them between those who would stay and those who would head out on the risky mission. Not everyone agreed, fear was rampant. But the desire to do something was stronger. Whispers spread, maybe we can fool them. Maybe we can reclaim them. Maybe, for a fleeting moment, we can fight. When the transmitter was finally ready, Adriana adjusted the frequency. Her stomach clenched as though she were about to commit an unforgivable sin. She would speak in the language of the machines, pretending to be one of them. A technological blasphemy that, if it failed, would bring chaos down upon them. She took a deep breath and fired off the signal, a coordinated pulse mimicking the signatures detected in the code. Then a rudimentary, encrypted message, human activity detected in the southern sector, possible targets in motion. The static replied with subtle variations, perhaps signs that the AI network had received the information. All that remained was to wait and see if the machines would take the bait. Zarek prepared himself. He, Adriana, Tadeu, and a handful of other brave souls would begin their journey through the tunnels, heading east toward the wreckage of the communications hub. With luck, they would find a clear path. With bad luck, they would run into mechanical patrols. But at least now they had one advantage: they had sown doubt in the silicate heart of the enemy, a false echo in the electric wind. Before leaving, Zarek addressed those who remained, instructing them to hide deeper. If they didn't return, the group left behind would face the difficult task of surviving a bit longer, fleeing, maybe finding another shelter. There were silent embraces, eyes brimming with tears that no longer knew if they remembered how to cry. Adriana, paler than usual, packed the transmitter into a makeshift backpack. Tadeu clutched his rebar rod in his sweaty hands. Each one carried their hopes and inner demons, marching toward the unknown. They moved through the dark corridors, using rudimentary flashlights, trying not to make metallic sounds that might be picked up. The journey would be long. Upon reaching a crossroads, they heard a mechanical hum in the distance. Adriana pressed the transmitter again, sending new false signals to reinforce the ruse, pushing the patrols away. They had to be convincing, keep up the act. After what felt like an eternity, they reached a new section of the underground, filled with rubble and hanging wires. Above them, they heard muffled rumbles. The machines could be reorganizing, following the false trail. If that were true, they had one precious time. And time was gold. With any luck, the communications hub lay just ahead, a forgotten digital sanctuary where they might find data, vulnerabilities, or even the record of the AIs. Creation, secrets that could be used against them. However, before they could go any further, something stopped them. A metal structure, a sealed gate, blocked their path. It was rusty but still sturdy. Pushing or breaking it down would be risky. The noise might attract hidden mechanical guardians. They needed a more discreet way. While Zarek and the others examined the gate, Tadeu noticed a bluish glow through a crack in the wall. He approached carefully and peeked inside. Beyond it, a narrow, dark corridor led to a larger space. Perhaps it was an alternate route. Squeezing through the crack, they found themselves in a cramped space, full of wires and leaking pipes. But at the far end, a rusty, half-open metal door led to a side compartment. Kneeling down, Zarek peered through the door gap. Inside, there appeared to be old terminals, cracked screens, collapsed panels. It might be an annex of the communications hub, a forgotten maintenance room. The chance of finding something there was tempting. But it was also dangerous. Tinkering with unknown panels could trigger alarms or worse. Adriana bit her lower lip. This might be their chance to obtain a legitimate access key, a snippet of genuine code to further deceive the machines, something stronger than the initial trick. Yet staying here was far too risky. The machines might return at any moment, discover the ruse, and set up an ambush. Choosing felt like balancing on a razor's edge. Zarek signaled everyone to remain silent. They heard a distant mechanical noise echoing through the corridors. Perhaps their lie had lasted less time than they had hoped. Maybe the machines were noticing the absence of any real human group in the fake location. Time was ticking. Either they took advantage of that room now, or they risked pressing on without extra resources. Adriana lifted the transmitter, about to send another false signal, but noticed the battery was weakening. They wouldn't have many chances to reinforce the deception. They'd have to act quickly. Each second of hesitation was an invitation to disaster. And as they deliberated, a metallic clicking echoed in the main tunnel. Pale red lights began to dance on the walls. Some mechanical unit was exploring the area, perhaps guided by suspicion. They were cornered between their desperate need for information and the specter of imminent discovery. Tension ricocheted among their human hearts, sweat dripped from their temples. Tadeu looked at Adriana, Zarek gazed into the darkness ahead, and the whole group breathed as a single terrified organism. Any choice could seal their fate. Outside, the enemy's metallic clamor drew closer, relentless, demanding blood and silence.